For the romantic idiot, the impulse to pair and our constant yearning for connection extends into all aspects of life beyond our mad and tireless quest for love. Romantic idiots will often form intense relationships with a book, a song, or a piece of art that can sometimes border on obsessive and all-consuming, embodying for us, at some level, the emotional charge of that depth sought after in our misguided and idealized notions pertaining to, human connection. So, take my shoulders and touch your arms. I'm a little cautious, but I feel alright. The bubblegum red was in your eyes. Oh. The book I read was in your eyes. I think this line can be read in two ways. Firstly, with regard to a kind of direct, unmediated transmission that us romantic idiots are always seeking from the world and our love objects. This book, by Todd McGowan, that I currently have a little bibliocrush on at the moment, thrills me as much as, a sort of a juicy match on some sort of dating app might thrill the romantic idiot. Perhaps because the book, although not designed for this, touches on a core tension of the romantic psyche, where alienation, in the case of the romantic imagination, might be presented as the distance between the self and the object of desire. In this framework, the object of desire becomes the focus of both an elusive as well as an unattainable longing, reflecting the inherent gap between what is desired and the self's inability to close that distance. This alienation is not just emotional or physical, it's more existential, marking a fundamental separation that the romantic idiot might experience as a painful gap between their inner world of intense feeling and the unattainability of the desired other, who seemingly holds the means to manifest that feeling for both of them within the realm of relationship, if only they would show up to do so. This lifts the object of desire from that of another human creature with their own self-focused needs and wishes into a more transcendent dimension, a heavenly, happy ever after dimension that one might dream of while still remaining rooted in the mundanity and impermanence of earth. A heaven which can only ever be reached through surrendering to the annihilation of the wishing self, perhaps at the point of death or some other metaphysical dissolution. For us atheists, though, that's not good news, as there can be no reunion then with any sort of flesh and blood beloveds in that heavenly realm spun out of the sexual marketplace once the game over music starts playing. McGowan might say that the romantic idiot is drawn to this book not because it offers an escape from alienation, although at some level it does, but because it reflects back the very structure of our own intensely fragmented subjective experience, the feeling of being divided, incomplete, forever in pursuit of something just out of reach. The book, like the lover, becomes a mirror of the self's own internal split, embodying the very alienation that the romantic idiot both suffers from as well as desires. The book, much like the beloved, becomes a vehicle for this tension, a mirror that reflects the yearning for wholeness, but also the impossibility of its attainment. We find this being played out in the very first chapter of Don Quixote, who, as you may know, is one of the romantic idiots of literature par excellence. This is my copy of Don Quixote. I was inspired by someone who did, something similar with that other great idiotic brick of a book, David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, just, sort of dividing it into smaller parts to make it easier to carry around. Anyway, here's the passage. It's right in the front. Having cleaned his armor and made a full helmet out of a simple headpiece, and having given a name to his horse and decided on one for himself, he realized that the only thing left for him to do was to find a lady to love. For the knight-errant without a lady love was a tree without leaves or fruit, a body without soul. And indeed, it is sort of like that, isn't it? A tree without leaves or fruit, a body without soul. Well said, Miguel de Cervantes. In attempting to find in another human creature the person to furnish the leaves and the fruit for this denuded tree, or perhaps, a complementary or kindred soul to inhabit our alien bodies, Quixote fixates on an attractive peasant girl from a nearby village called Aldonza Lorenzo. In Cervantes' time, this would have been like having a beloved named, Maud Clutterbuck or Mildred Crumplehorn, names evoking a certain rustic charm, but hardly the stuff of passion and ecstasy. So, to keep the idiotic fantasy alive, Quixote, who himself is trading under an assumed name, renames his chosen object of desire Dulcinea de Toboso, Dulcinea being a play on the Spanish word dulce, meaning sweet, and Toboso referring to her hometown. He then sets off to pursue this poor woman, as well as all the other idiocies that befall him along the way, which, all connect up, of course, to this fundamental category error of mistaking fantasy for reality. Dulcinea also suggests an idealized, unattainable form of love that Don Quixote cannot help but project onto her. This transformation of a plain village girl into a ethereal noblewoman serves as a symbol of his attempt to superimpose his fantasies onto reality, projection of course being the core delusion and driving force of the love quest. The rest of the novel, spanning over 900 pages, can be seen as Quixote's ongoing battle with the mundanity and harshness of reality, where moments of reckoning and glimpses of disillusionment with regard to his romantic delusions are always nipping at his heels, even though they never fully extinguish his unwavering belief in those chivalric but also completely idiotic ideals. That is, until the end of the book, in which, on his deathbed, he finally renounces his idiotic romantic fantasies, returning also to the identity of Alonso Quixano, who is sort of the Clark Kent to his delusional Superman, only now resigned to the reality that he once so fervently resisted. When we say the book I read was in your eyes, I think it also speaks to this idiotic desire for seamless connection, for something that can cut through the alienation we inevitably carry as subjects. McGowan makes the consolatory claim in his book that alienation is in fact intrinsic to subjectivity itself, rather than something to be cured or resolved. Somewhat against, you might say, our current cultural grain. Alienation, he argues, is really instead the fundamental condition of being a subject. For is not our subjectivity invariably and necessarily built on a kind of schism or split between ourselves and the world, between our desires and the objects onto which we project them? In this way, the romantic idiot's attachment to books, art, or music isn't merely a distraction from human relationship, but rather a sort of parallel to them, for both offer the same seductive promise of completion, yet both also remain elusive in some way, keeping the idiot in this state of perpetual engagement, never quite arriving at the destination. And yet, because our connection with a book is unmediated, other than through the medium of language, in a way that our connection with human beings never can be, a more romantically satisfying gloss on the book I read is in your eyes might suggest that only through art, through books, songs, and paintings does the romantic ideal of seamless transmission occur. Were I to meet Todd McGowan at a party, I'm sure he would be, delightful company. All the interviews I've watched with him, as well as his Why Theory podcast that he does with his buddy Ryan Engley, all reveal him to be a very funny, sweet, and humane individual, as well as an intellectual titan. But it's only when I sit with his written words that I think I get to experience the unmediated crystallization of Todd's mind and heart, his soul, if you like, in his attempt to convey the essence of his thoughts. And in that moment, particularly when I reach for a pencil to underline or mark a passage that speaks deeply to me, something, I might already know, but as is often the case, need someone else to articulate, I experience a form of union or communion with Todd that I believe we very rarely and fleetingly attain. And this, of course, is the larger, more macro realm of eros that goes beyond the flesh and blood creatures we encounter in the sexual marketplace. This becomes even more significant when we remember that our modern ideas of romance originated essentially in the realm of imagination and of literature, rather than from biological necessity or social frameworks. The medieval novels and poetry that enshrined courtly love set the stage thereafter for a cultural fixation on this wholly elusive and incorporeal phenomenon, this force that stirs the soul precisely because it cannot be satisfied. The early romances like Tristan and Isolde framed love as inherently tragic, where the obstacles that prevented fulfillment are what made the love itself seem pure, transcendent, and worthy of pursuit. This unattainable love, frequently between a knight and a married noblewoman, married, yes, in other words, he could never really have her in reality, set the foundation for this enduring idea played out in the centuries to follow, in every rom-com as well as, every romantic novel and song worth its salt. This idea that true romance ultimately thrives on separation and yearning, where the lover suffers for what they cannot have and satiation is always just beyond reach, creating a perpetual cycle of longing that fuels the very essence of desire. And yet, like those other lotteries, fingers crossed, hope resides in the idea that love, the ultimate jackpot, the ultimate existential payoff, might be only a swipe or two away, to put it in, modern dating parlance. I think David Byrne might even be winking at us romantic fools once more in that line about living in the future, which of course is the only place that romantic yearning or, the romantic ideal can live.
I'm living in the future. I feel wonderful. I'm tipping over backwards. I'm so ambitious. I'm looking back. I'm running a race and you're the book I read. So
This sense of tipping over backwards here evokes both the thrill and the precariousness of this, forward-looking stance. The romantic idiot is filled, of course, always with a sense of wonder, ambition, and possibility, yet is also always on the verge of losing balance, like that other fool on the tarot card. Byrne and the song capture this heady feeling of being overtaken by hope, ambition, and the weight of one's own desires. The backward tipping is maybe a sort of physical manifestation of that overreaching desire.
Na, 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 na. Na, 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 na. Na, 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 na. Na, 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 na. Woo! Na, 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 na.
So what about that na section? David Byrne, an Enneagram 5, I think, reminds me that 5s always are sort of standing atop a mountain, looking down, not in an elitist or condescending way, but rather in a sort of detached, observant manner. From this elevated perspective, they witness the world's absurdities, its chaos, its idiocies, with a quiet, almost analytical amusement. There's a sense of distance, a desire to understand rather than participate, as if they're watching the human drama unfold from a safe vantage point, more interested in deciphering its patterns than in getting swept up in its emotional tides. So for those of us who might be feeling loveless, Byrne's exuberant nonsense vocalizations in the na part, for me anyway, doesn't feel as if he's mocking us from a distance. Instead, they seem to beckon us perhaps into a moment of shared experience, of community, and thus of non-alienation. It is as though the very ridiculousness of the extended na section, which has no linguistic meaning, allows us to step out of our individual stories of longing and alienation for half a minute or so. The alienated subject can no longer stand entirely apart. Instead, there's that fleeting moment of community, a shared absurdity in which we're all caught up in, regardless of our emotional status. In this sense, the public realm, often fragmented and disconnected, briefly transforms into a kind of spontaneous collective community, perhaps also that of the Talking Heads fan, united by our love-seeking human condition.